Hey, this is Scott, and today we're going to take a look at the brand new Godox XPro flash trigger. This video is not going to go super in-depth into the menus and functions of the XPro. I will have a second video for that very soon, but I'm going to talk about the number of different ways in which the XPro is a vast improvement over the X1. If you were thinking about getting into the Godox system for either their speedlights, the 80-200, or one of their larger strobes, I would have highly recommended it, except for some slight reservations in regards to the X1. It functioned perfectly, it is very reliable, and it has a crazy long range, but it was extremely frustrating in terms of its interface. The XPro is a huge improvement in pretty much every area except possibly one, so let's see why. I'll start with that one area that I just mentioned, and that's the lack of a pass-through Hotshoe on the top like the X1 had. It can be annoying if you're mixing systems like Godox and Elenchrom, for example, but with this style of trigger it's pretty much unavoidable, and there are workarounds which I won't get into here because there's probably more than one. Other than that though, it's all sunshine and rainbows with this trigger, so let's take a look. One of the biggest upgrades is the plethora of buttons on here. The X1 had 3 buttons to access its different functions, not counting the test flash or the switches on the side. Each of these was very minimally labeled, and while they each had a secondary function, those were not labeled at all. This meant a lot of trial and error when looking for those functions unless you have a great memory, which I definitely do not. The wheel to scroll through these groups to make adjustments was always a little bit loose for my taste, and for some reason I always had trouble remembering which direction to scroll. The XPro has the most buttons and dials of any trigger that I've seen, including individual buttons to quickly access each group's controls independently without having to scroll through them. The buttons are labeled much more clearly, and of course so are their secondary functions. Combined with the amazing amount of information you can see on the giant screen and the ability to kind of zoom in and view groups full screen individually, makes using the XPro absolutely effortless, especially when compared with the X1. For me, the next biggest improvement is the menu system. The menus on the X1 were hands down some of the worst I've ever seen. There was so little space on the screen to display information that everything was all numbers and secret codes, and again, if you don't have the memory of a superhero, this was nearly impossible to get used to. The hugely improved display of the XPro means that these menus are now very usable even without looking at the manual for the most part. This even features a TCM function that lets you shoot one shot in TTL, then apply those settings to manual mode, keeping exposure consistent on all shots after that, or letting you fine-tune it very easily. In terms of actual physical build quality, the X1 wasn't bad at all, except for the battery door that I always did feel like I was going to break eventually. The battery door in the XPro is not hugely improved, but it does feel a bit smoother than the X1. The higher profile of the XPro also gives you a lot more space to get your fingers in there when tightening or loosening the Hotshoe mount, and I did find myself occasionally and embarrassingly struggling with this on the lower profile of the X1. So again, I will be making another video going more in depth to the menus and functions of the XPro, and I'll link that here when it's ready, but that's my take on why the XPro hands down puts the final nail in the coffin of other flash systems for me personally. If you have any questions or comments, let me know down below. I always love hearing from you. If you liked this video or found it helpful, give me a thumbs up, subscribe to see more in the future, and click that little bell icon to get notifications when I upload new content. And as always, thank you for watching.